Thank you all for coming to this session with the future leaders and our next interview for leaders in data. Today we're joined by the future leaders of Bridget and Drew to help us interview two, well, very impressive data leaders in my eyes anyway. So representing various roles, not least the Alliance of Data Science Professionals. So we've got Ed Rochead and Rachel Hilliam today to join us for some interview questions. What we're going to do. So if I could just ask Rachel and Ed just a quick question, and then Bridget will come on to her questions and introduce herself before those, and then Drew will come on to his and introduce himself before his questions, and give you a bit of understanding about their backgrounds as well. So Ed and Rachel, what I really want to hear from you is basically your journey to where you are now, from where you started. So how did you get to where you are? A brief overview. How did that differ to any original plans? Did you want to be astronauts, for example, and then you've ended up in illustrious careers in data and statistics? So, Ed, if I could ask you to go first, and then we'll go to Rachel, please.
Thank you, Ricky. So as you've heard, I'm Ed. I've been a government science professional since I graduated. So I joined the Defence Evaluation and Research Agency, which was part of MOD in 1998 on graduating with a Master of Mathematics from Loughborough University. And I've remained in the same family of jobs ever since. I've started my career doing mathematical modelling of armour systems. Then I did various operational analysis, or also called operational research jobs, where including looking at long-term procurements, short-term support to operations. Then I moved sideways into program management and did a lot of work on making the RAF and Royal Navy and indeed the Army's aircraft safer, including commissioning a lot of work on things like pilot fatigue and so forth, which were well outside my comfort zone. Then really found my niche as someone who really loves managing strategic partnerships and did a lot of work engaging industry, academia, and indeed military stakeholders for what had become by then the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. And eventually in 2022 became its chief mathematician and also deputy head of a division of 1,200 STEM professionals working on the science inside ships, tanks, aeroplanes, submarines, and so forth. Then in 2023, I moved sideways into central MOD and became its commissioner for AI, autonomy, data, cyber, and that job involves basically working out what research MOD needs in those topics and then commissioning a program of work to deliver it. And then, of course, checking in that the program is being delivered and also thinking about future needs. Alongside work, and this is where I think has really added value to both my life and my career, is I hold a fellowship at the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications and also the Royal Society of the Arts. I'm a chartered mathematician. And of course, I have the privilege to be chair of the Alliance for Data Science Professionals, which is, I think, probably why I'm here. I hold a postgraduate diploma in materials. I'm visiting professor of innovation strategy at Loughborough University, honorary professor at Birmingham University. I'm a governor, that's to say a non-executive director and trustee of the University of Winchester, which is my local university. And I'm particularly proud there of the work we do on social mobility. I used to chair until very recently a charity working with adults with learning disabilities through the arts, and I've written at least 35 thought leader articles and given a number of lectures on STEM, history and diversity topics, and indeed a couple of weeks ago recorded my first podcast as part exploring the role of data and AI in veterinary science, which will be on Spotify in due course. So I think that's probably both my professional and what my wife calls my semi-professional career journey. So I'll hand over to Rachel, I guess. Over.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to the podcast, Ed. Can't wait. Okay, so my journey is a bit more, I always describe when I do a careers talk as my journey is not so much a journey as a random walk really through various things that I've done. So I did a maths degree at Warwick University, that was 91 to 94, and it really was a maths degree. There was relatively little statistics in it. That was through choice really. Um, I then at some point whilst I was doing that degree decided that if I wanted a job, I was probably more likely to get a job as a statistician than I was as a mathematician. And that is genuinely the only reason that I decided to move into statistics. So I applied for various MSCs and I kind of thought it might be more interesting to do an MSc in medical statistics than in straight statistics. At the time, which was 94, there was a medical statistics MSc that was run jointly between Leicester University and De Montfort University. So that's where I was going to end up going. And whilst I was in the middle of doing my finals, De Montfort basically phoned me up to say, oh, did I fancy doing this PhD? And I was literally about to catch the bus to go and do a exam in catastrophe theory. And quite frankly, anything seemed like a good idea at that moment. So the first thing is never make decisions when your mind is absolutely somewhere else, which it was in my case. So I went to De Montfort to do a PhD there. It was kind of quite an interesting PhD. Looking back now, it was probably my first sort of introduction to what we might think of as data science now. So it was involved in a much larger project. And what we were doing is we were building basically an expert system to help neuroradiologists diagnose brain disorders. So, and this was way back in 94. So way before the time of sort of what we might think about as artificial intelligence systems now. So it was kind of quite an interesting project. I also ended up getting a job as a lecturer there whilst I was doing my PhD. So I very much ended up doing my PhD part-time and being a full-time lecturer. And De Montfort was very teaching heavy, so there wasn't an awful lot of time to do my PhD. Kind of because of that, I sort of made the decision that if I was going to carry on in academia, I really should go somewhere else where I could have more time to do research. So having been at De Montfort for about 6 years, I think, I started looking around for other jobs and moved to the University of Birmingham. So I had one of these EPSRC fellowships basically at the University of Birmingham. And that was a research project which was looking at, well, it was looking at the statistical aspects of multidimensional chaotic systems, basically. But it had various applications in communications. So it was great because I linked up with engineers at Bologna University. I got to go to Bologna University. They got to come to Birmingham. What's not to like, really, with that? So that was a sort of interesting kind of project there. And I guess something that might come up later on is I stayed there for 3 years. I did still do some lecturing there, and I also started to do some part-time tutoring for the Open University. But at the end of those 3 years, I decided I wanted to come out of academia. And the main reason for me doing that is because I was that kind of age, and it was the time that if we were going to have a family, that's when we were going to do it. And I basically decided it would be easier to do that outside of academia than inside of academia. And at that point, that probably was the case, but that certainly wouldn't be the case now. And I think looking back, that was also based on my experiences in particular institutions. And I don't think you should generalize across all institutions either. But that's what I decided to do. So in 2003 it would be, I came out of academia and I went to work for Derby Hospitals Trust. So I was basically their medical statistician and looked after all of the trust-based research that was going on across 2 hospital sites and various PCTs as well. So that was sort of quite fun, and it was probably the first time that I had a sort of proper, what you might think of as a statistical consultancy sort of job role as well. There were lots of different areas of the university where I used to go and work with those individual groups. In fact, when I left, it was really funny because every single group, I'm sure, just thought I worked for them. I think they just thought I was in a cupboard and came out to answer their questions and then went back into my cupboard again. But it was a good experience for me in terms of learning very much about team building, certainly learning a lot about internal politics. If you ever want to get anything done in the NHS, you have to go through a lot of committees to get anything done in the NHS, let me tell you. And I would have stayed there until 2011 and did have 2 children whilst I was there. Very much changed my working hours to suit how old my children were in terms of starting school and that sort of thing as well. In 2011, I moved to the Open University, where I've more or less been ever since, and I've had various roles at the Open University. I'm currently head of School of Maths and Statistics there. We're recording this, aren't we? I was going to say for reasons best known to myself, but that's probably not the thing to say on the recording. I've also done roles as Director of Teaching there and had various student experience sort of roles there as well. So I'm Professor of Statistics there at the moment. I did have a short period of time in 2018, I think it was, where I left and went to Warwick University and then went back to the OU about 9 months later. And again, actually, that was mainly to do with family reasons. At that age, I would say my kids must have been about 14 and 16, something like that. So at that age, as people will tell you, you spent a lot of your time being a taxi service for them, and the commute from my house to Warwick, along with being a taxi service for my children, just got too much, really. So that was one of the reasons for going back to the OU. It wasn't the only reason. Like Ed, I am a chartered mathematician and have been for a long time. Can't remember when that was. I'm also a chartered statistician. I've done various bits of roles in the RSS. So a long time ago when I was at Birmingham, I was secretary of the local group there. I've then been on PAC, for 5 years it must have been, before stepping down last year, and chaired that particular group as well, which means that I was also vice president for the RSS and chaired the Alliance for Data Science Professionals before handing over to Ed, which was a very happy day when he took the reins on this one and is taking it on hugely. So I think my sort of journey into data science is really from a maths and statistics type of background there. And one thing that I did do at the Open University is I did create, obviously along with colleagues, our data science undergraduate degree as well. So that went live back in 2017. So that was sort of my first real time that I thought about data science as an entity, as opposed to just working across disciplines there.
Oh, thank you both for those answers. That's really helpful. It gives us an understanding, and hopefully Bridget and Drew, gives you some understanding of the varied backgrounds as well individuals come from. Bridget, if you'd like to give us an introduction into yourself, please, and then you can feel free to go straight into your questions as well, please.
Hi, so thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you, Ed and Rachel. Thank you for sharing. So my name is Bridget. My background is in economics and statistics, where I had my first degree. And from then on, I did a master's in economics. And then my PhD was in advanced quantitative methods. So I've worked really using quantitative data in most of my research, and I have some experience doing research in international development and education, but very heavily focused on quantitative data analysis. Currently, I work as a policy data lead at Research England. So my background is very heavy quantitative economics, statistics. Yeah, and it's great to be here. So I'll just jump straight into the questions. And I think the first question I had is for Rachel, and you kind of already touched on some of those things. So I'll just ask you, and let's see. So it's, as a woman in a traditionally male-dominated field, do you feel you had to approach certain aspects of your career differently in order to stand out and succeed? And if so, what strategies did you find most effective to be able to succeed in your career as a woman?
Okay, I guess that's for me then, Ed, isn't it, really?
Yes.
So, I don't know. This is an interesting sort of question. I think very early on in my career, because I was in a male-dominated environment and had always come through that from school, if I'm being brutally honest, I didn't really notice because that was just the norm. So when you look round the room, I sort of didn't really see it as being male dominated because that's just what I was used to. So I think it's only kind of later in life that I've really begun to take that on board in quite the same way. So I think there's definitely certain things there. I think you should. So one thing that I have found, if you're in meetings, lots of meetings, people will almost always, it's getting less so these days, but go to a man first to answer a question, unlike what's just happened here. So I think one of the things to do is not be afraid to get your voice across in a meeting. But the biggest bit of advice that I can give to you is after that meeting, follow up the point that you were trying to make. So email the person outside with just an email that says, oh, I just wanted to pick this up with you again. Not quite sure if I got my point across well enough. This is what I'm really trying to say. Could we pick up this conversation later on? And people will always appreciate that. So I think if it's something where you're worrying about really sort of articulating yourself in that forum, just do it outside and follow it up would be my biggest bit of advice there.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's a very helpful advice. And I guess the next question can go to both you and Ed. And I think you've given some advice already. So what advice would you give to young professionals, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds who are looking to build successful careers in data and statistics? So, yeah.
So, yes, I think I'm having some feel quite that I'm sort of parts of me are sort of not from underrepresented ground. So I'm sort of, but I certainly was painfully shy when I started work and grew up as the sort of first in a loving home, but in a tied cottage on a farm where my dad was a farm worker and had loving parents, but with no university experience. So I think the first thing I learned was sort of working hard got me that place at university, which I have then launched my career from. But I think the thing I've really valued and really helped me is developing a network of peers who are my support network. So I've got a number of peers who have been peers, colleagues, friends for a number of years, and I work quite hard at maintaining that network as a source of advice, a sort of source of comfort, sometimes just a sounding board. And obviously I'm offering it back to them when they're having a difficult time. I think that has been and I'm considered a networker, and I think what I'm really good at is maintaining friendships in many ways, and by making an effort. And if something, even people I don't know that well, now, for instance, Rachel said earlier she'd be interested in my veterinary AI podcast, I'll definitely remember to send her a link to it when it's published. And it's little things like that make all the difference. The other piece of advice I would give is I found it really valuable to engage with my professional body, in my case, predominantly the Institute of Mathematics and its applications, but other professional bodies are available. And by engaging with them, I've written for their magazine. I've been on a number of their committees. I was on their council until a couple of years ago, and I probably would be again now if I hadn't picked up the Alliance chair role. That's given me a massive network and a community of peers from totally different sectors, albeit with similar experiences. So I think that those are the two main pieces of advice I would give. It's the developing a network of peers within one's own industry and organization, and also engaging with and being a key player, becoming a real player in one's professional body and getting that wider network over.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Yeah, and just to pick up on Ned's point about networking there as well, the other thing that I would say is, you know, when you're wanting to reach out to somebody, find out what it is that they're interested in and what it is that they're trying to do, and broker that conversation in that way. Because most people's favourite topic of conversation is themselves. So find out about what it is they're interested in, and then it really helps being able to have that conversation with them as well. And the other thing, which is easier said than done, is don't let that inner voice tell you shouldn't be there. And that's really hard. That's really hard to do. But everybody, absolutely everybody has that. So don't think you are alone in having those sort of self-doubts, because you're absolutely not there. But recognise what it is. That it's not something that's real, but it's something that's implanted there as well.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. The next question is for both of you as well. You've both dedicated significant time to volunteering in your fields. You've been on different boards, chaired different groups, and you mentioned that as well, Ed. So how has that experience, how has that influenced your career growth and helped you develop your leadership skills? Rachel, you can go, and then Ed.
So it's absolutely invaluable, really, and I think it's helpful in terms of getting, you know, Ed's talked about that network, and I think it's really important in terms of having external networks outside of where you work, partly because it gives you a whole different perception on what's out there. It allows you to bring all of that back into your work, as well as that feeding out as well. And it's that thing about having very different voices too. So the more that you do sort of externally, it doesn't even have to be in your own field. You know, Ed's talked about volunteering in different organisations. I happen to play in an orchestra where, you know, I've been on their committee and done things as well. And it's just about the more, and sort of it's that networking experience to a certain extent, Ed, as well, isn't it? The more that you put yourself in that position of making sure that you have those conversations, the easier it becomes when it's something that you absolutely need to do at work. I mean, like Ed, I wasn't particularly painfully shy, but I do remember the first international conferences that I went to, and I absolutely hated that pre-conference first dinner. I absolutely hated it to such an extent that I used to have to go and throw up beforehand. But I knew that it was part of, you know, what you had to do. And Ricky's making a face, because Ricky's been to lots of places with me where I just go and talk to all of the people there. But you do have to get yourself over that hurdle. So the more that you can do about that, the easier it does become.
So I think some of that rings very true with me as well. I think if you're being very harsh about it, if you are nervous, and certainly if I'm nervous about going into a room, I definitely don't ask myself, do these people like me? It's actually, do I like these people as I'm walking into the room, is a really useful little nudge to help me get over the nervousness of doing that. Sorry, I was engrossed in Rachel's answer and I've forgotten what the initial question was. So
you've spent a significant amount of time like volunteering. Like, how has that helped you develop your leadership skills and supported your career growth?
Brilliant. Yes. So I think for me, I agree entirely with the network point that Rachel raised. I won't repeat that. What I found is I've really enjoyed being a trustee of various charities, and that is effectively a non-executive director, but in another sector. So you're suddenly right at the top of an organization, and your usually collective decisions with your fellow trustees are certainly could be career making or breaking for people who work in the charity concern, which almost all professional bodies are charities, for instance. So that's one area where one can do it. I've been on a trustee of a community centre, a theatre, as well as the charity I mentioned that works with adults with learning disabilities. And it's so the skills you get are really seeing how an organisation works from the top. If I were to ever be made an executive director of, say, a government agency, I think I would be have a really good idea of how to interact with the non-executive directors and really understand what they'll be worrying about, but also be able to get them busy on things that they add value on. And so I think that it's that real understanding how an organization works from the other side is key. I mean, I've also found it, being for instance, a university governor, a really rewarding experience, because I can nominate people for honorary doctorates and things. So I've been able to make sure some people who deserved real recognition have been able to have become honorary doctors or fellows of the university of which I'm a governor. And I think that's a real privilege as well, to be able to make some wonderful work that people have been doing recognized by a major higher education institute. Oliver.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. My final question before I hand over to Drew is, looking back at your careers, what would you say, if you can pick one key moment or project that was very transformative for your career journey or your professional development, what would that be?
Do you want me to go first, Ed?
Yeah, that's fine.
What are you thinking? So the one thing for me definitely is during the pandemic, myself, Kevin Houston and Michael Grove, we set up something called Talmo. So this was basically, as universities had to put their teaching online at a drop of a hat, we tried to come up with a way to really help them do that. So we started off thinking we'd just have one meeting and we get various people to talk at this meeting about that, put all those resources online, and that would be it. And we sort of came up with a free version of Zoom to do this. It was only when over 1,000 people turned up to that meeting that we suddenly realized what an absolute need there was for this. And it's carried on even after the pandemic as well. And it's the one thing when I go round to places, because obviously all these people recognize me because my camera's on, they all say that it was the one thing that got them through the pandemic, and also the one bit of kind of personal development that they've absolutely valued. So for me, that was the thing that I think is most worthwhile that I've done.
Thank you. Oh, that's amazing. So for me, the most transformative experience was probably in about 2013, when I made a massive sideways move in my career in DSTL, and moved from essentially doing work, in that case operation analysis, to leading it. And so in 2013, I was appointed program manager for the snappily named program Air Enabling Capabilities and Technologies, which was everything left over when you got a combat air program, an air operation analysis program, an air survivability program, and a autonomous air program. So it was things like safety of aircraft, both things like metal fatigue and pilot fatigue, helicopters, large aircraft, parachutes, and all sorts of other odd things. That it was known as the Airbag of Bits program, and it was a new program. It hadn't existed before. I had to form it. I worked out a model where I had a team of technical experts in the different areas, and sort of led them, and my role was basically to enable them to deliver as much high value science and technology to in this case the military users. And whereas where prioritization decisions had to be taken between completely different things, and where stakeholders weren't the same for each. So I was really proud, and I had a line manager, had 40 direct reports and had almost no supervision, but I knew if I needed it, he had my back. And so even if I made a complete mess of it, he might in private tell me I'd been an idiot, but in public he would help me sort it out and back me. And that was a real turning point professionally. And I'd had quite, shall we say, slow promotion up the levels in the civil service before then. Since then, I've done very well, and I think I found my style of working, and it's really been helpful to me. I think if I might very add, because we've sort of Rachel answered the question slightly differently, and I think I want to perhaps the most important journey from part of the journey for me from what you might call an EDI perspective was when I became the male buddy of a female support group within DSTL. I'm talking about 10 years ago or so now, DSTL there were so few senior female role models that they set up groups where each woman could mentor about 6 women from the level below them. And they were encouraged but not mandated to take along a male buddy, a peer of the senior woman, who could both do mentoring. And what was more important, and in many ways brilliant, was I got an insight into what it was like to be a woman in DSTL and possibly in wider professions. And my eyes were open to some of the things that went on, which was a real game changer in the way I've operated since, the way I deal with people. I'm now well linked with the Women in Defence organisation, and for 2 years I co-led DSTL's Gender Equality Network, and that in getting involved with that mentoring group was sort of really opened my eyes. And so sort of in professional, so that's my answer for both professional and sort of EDI terms. Over.
Can I just pick up on that before we finish as well, Bridget? Because that's also going back to your first question about, being a woman in a male-dominated environment. I can't stress strongly enough how important it is to have male allyship in there. So if there's one thing that you can do in those, women types of groups is to really get a male friend on your side for this, because they speak in a completely different sort of way to their male colleagues to what you do. So having that in there is absolutely important.
Amazing. Thank you both. Over to you, Drew.
Thank you, Bridget. And thank you to Rachel and Ed for giving such nice answers so far. So intro, I am Drew Shah. I am a senior statistician at the National Centre for Social Research. And mainly what I do is focused on the statistics of survey research. So doing sampling and weighting processes for big national surveys. That's mainly what I've been focused on. The only other thing that I've done within stats is get the data science professional certificate from IBM, which is very good, but was very difficult to do at the same time as work, and completely different to what I do every day. Okay, so my first question, and I think this is definitely Rachel needs to answer this first. So you're both chairs of the Data Science Alliance, and you've been you're the chairs from very early on in its existence. Can you tell me sort of what you've done to build in inclusion into the early work of the Alliance?
Okay, in terms of the very early work of the Alliance, one thing that we did when we set up the first certificate, so that's the Advanced Data Science Professional Certificate there, we we wanted to spread across all of the different societies, first of all, for that. But when we went out to people in those different societies, we were quite clear that we wanted a spread of diversity of people, both in terms of different roles that they did, as well as an EDI and gender split there as well. So that was the first thing that we did there. And part of the reason for doing that is so that we could then use that group of people to actually be ambassadors for other people as well. So that was the thing that we really tried to do in terms of embedding that at the beginning. I don't know if you want to pick up further, Ed, because I mean, there's quite a lot that you've done since in terms of outreach about it.
Yes. So I'm assuming you want me to follow on, Drew. So I think you're right. I've certainly personally done a fair amount of outreach to some diverse groups, and what I'm in the process of doing is setting up a task and finish group to look at the sort of strategic direction of the alliance, what will be a success. And I was definitely, as part of that, I was planning to consider EDI analysis. And what I would like, I've already started capturing sort of KPIs for each of the bodies awarding our certificates, and I would like to evolve it so we're capturing EDI data as part of that, because I think it's important that we not only do it, but we hold ourselves to account for doing it. And so I think a mix of moral leadership and developing ways of tracking it would be, I would say, I wouldn't say I've done it yet, but that's the journey I'm hoping we're on and I'm trying to lead.
Okay. So a quick follow-up to that then would be, now that you've done this work, how would you advise other people sort of near the top of other organizations or getting data science or statistics teams set up in their organizations to do similar work?
Well, I haven't done it yet, so I don't know. I wouldn't be able to use that as my role model. But in terms of how I would do that based on my career experience to date, I would say, in general, we somehow need to square the circle of, you probably get most innovation in multidisciplinary teams, but you have most sharing of good practice in statistics, data, mathematics, and better career outcomes in single disciplinary teams. So that's that feels like a lose-lose. And the way I would make that work for us is to organize people within their discipline, but task them to work on multidisciplinary projects. And so you get and I'm talking in industry or business industry or government probably here. So essentially people generally have a line manager who knows more about the subject than they do, so they can help them with quality, and they've got peers in their own team who can sort of also guide them on good practice in their discipline. But they're working with other people in other disciplines, and certainly in the program and project management discipline, if in most organizations, to deliver the highest outcomes, which would mean you get the opportunity to cross-pollinate. I've not got into it yet, but I'm really looking forward as the alliance evolves to finding out more about how non-mathematical science professions might want to be accredited or certified using our work. I know, for instance, the Royal Society of Chemistry has a data section. I now know of loads of vets who are using AI and data in their work, and I think some of those might well want to be certificated. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see how, as data science becomes more ubiquitous, we cater to their needs. It's not obvious to me how we cater to their needs, but that's something I'm hoping we can evolve to. Over.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I pick up on there is it's also about understanding the other roles. So data science is this whole breadth of things. So in order for that, as Ez talked about, that multidisciplinary to really work well, there's a certain amount of understanding that needs to take place. And not just understanding, but recognition that everybody's part in that is equally important. So it's about being able to, communicate in the same language, to know what those people are talking about when they're talking about that specific area, so that you can add your voice and your bit of value, as well as taking on board what they're saying and how that fits together. So for me, it's about lots of things that we do are about listening to other people and understanding what their perception is. So I think data science is more about that potentially than many other things we can do.
Thanks very much. Okay, I guess I'll move to my last question. So what is your earliest memory in your career of taking leadership over a data project or an aspect of collecting or analyzing data? And how did you build the experience and the knowledge to be able to do that?
So, well, I could go first, because although I don't feel I'm as data-y person as some, because I will take it slightly more broadly. I think one of the key things I got involved with when I was co-lead of DSTL's Gender Equality Network was helping write a bid for DSTL to be accredited by a gender equality body, and it was very, very hard, because the body concerned wasn't really there to accredit government agencies. It was there to we were sort of piggybacking, because there was an accreditor that existed. We were piggybacking on that accreditor. So shoehorning the data of a government agency into a form that was designed for a university department was actually a very hard thing to do. So I think the main lesson I would bring from that, and I've found it in a number of other areas as well, is when you're trying to analyze a particular thing, trying to finding the right data set to analyze it with, i.e., don't try and shoehorn just because we've got a way of doing it here. If that's totally inappropriate, then it's often more work than it's worth trying to shoehorn the data into a structure it wasn't designed for. So trying to find the right KPIs for your particular entity is where, in the context in which it exists, is, I think, probably the most powerful lesson I've had. And in fact, I was in a situation last week where I was reviewing one of my programs and realized that the way we were reviewing it was totally wrong in the context in which it was operating, for reasons I won't bore you with now, but essentially that lesson has been a good one through life. Over.
Thanks, Ed. That's great. Well, I guess the first data project that I was involved with was my PhD. So as part of that, I used to go down to London and actually extract MRI scans from the MRI machine down there. That's how old I am, that you had to go in person and, download all this onto disks and then bring it back and then strip away all the identifiable information. And yeah, so I guess some of that lesson is about actually collecting the data, as it's hard work. Even now, collecting the right data is hard work. But also I'd add something more to that. It's not just about collecting the right data, but understanding in that data set the data that you haven't got. So I don't think we actually think enough about, what are the things that we haven't collected, and is that actually going to influence what the outcomes are? So, we talk a lot, don't we, about, have we got the right mix of people in our data set to be able to train the models and do the things that we want to do? So I think always having that at the back of your mind about what is the data that we haven't got, and should we either go and collect some more data, or should we plug this in a different way, or is there a different way of looking at that, would also be my plea there.
Thanks. Oh, thanks, Drew, and thanks, Bridget, and thanks, Rachel and Ed, for such great answers. There's a lot to take from it. I think there's some great points already. So, you know, always following up on your points post meetings is a really great piece of general advice as well. I think that's a really good thing to really get your point across and stand out. To build that, I really like that the obviously I'm going to like engaging with your professional body, but I think just building on your support network and utilizing that is a really useful tool, whether it's your professional body or a social interest or anything. I think building that network, maintaining the network, as Ed says, is really important. What it also does is I found when working with people is it also gives you it does give you that confidence in yourself as well, to know that you are having the same thoughts, you know, you are in the right place, you are in the right room, you're having the same doubts, importantly as well, you know, they're not just your doubts. So that was a really good point, I thought, and again, not to let imposter syndrome sink in, you are in the right place. And I like Ed's view on that of, you know, don't worry about if the people in the room like you as you go in, to turn it around. Do you like them? That was a really good point for me. That's something I do a lot, actually, is, you know, trust yourself and what you know, and know self-value, and I think your network really helps support that. And I think and the last point I think was really made well was the understanding and communication is a big thing, especially as you move into leadership roles. Understand the people around you, what's required, not just the work set and data set, but how you communicate what's required as well. That was really interesting to hear about, and how you when you are in a leadership roles, you're building on the skills of everyone, not just yourself, and that's a pivotal thing as a leader. With all such great nuggets already and everything that's given, there's a lot there, but I think the one question to end it on, as we're trying to collect in all of our future leader interviews, is what's the one piece of advice that you would give with regards to leadership, and if so, leadership in data or just leadership generally, from both yourselves? If we go Rachel first and then Ed, please.
Can I have two?
Go for it.
Well, I'm going to have two, so you can.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, well, it was going back to the walking in and walking into meetings. Actually, it's something that you're going to laugh at, Ricky, I know when I say this, but something that I probably do slightly less now, but used to do an awful lot, was imagine who I wanted to take into that meeting with me. So I had an imaginary person that went into that meeting with me, and it depended what I wanted to get done in that meeting for who that person was. So sometimes it's like a, you know, Mary Poppins spot, we need to get all of this done, and sometimes it might be some sort of statistical heavyweight and you wanting that, you know, kind of gravitas in there. So that has been something that has actually helped me in the past, because it sort of takes away the focus on you to a certain extent, and you know, you're able to take on a different persona in some way. So that may or may not help. But the thing that I probably did want to say, Ricky, in terms of leadership positions, remember that leadership is about the people that are following. It's not about you striding off in front with this. So I would say, if there's one thing to think about, it's how you're empowering others. So, and it's about giving the recognition to everybody else, but actually taking the blame yourself when it all goes wrong too. So it really is about that empowering other people. This is a journey that you're on together, rather than you just being at the front of the pack there, which really shouldn't be how it's working.
So I will build on that, and I might even make it three. But I think I entirely agree with Rachel's last point, and I think that a lot of people will try and not give credit to people who've helped them because they think they will get less credit. They think it's a zero-sum game. Actually, it isn't a zero-sum game. If someone says, "Well done, Ed, that's worked brilliantly," I said, "Thank you. I was actually helped massively by X and Y." X and Y and I don't get a third the credit each. I get a lot of credit for delegating and empowering, and they get some credit as well. It probably adds up to more than 300%. So essentially, I think that's a really key thing, and which is why I'm really big on nominating people for prizes and awards. I'm happy to say I've got two people state honours in the last 2 years, including one for a major piece of EDI work in defence, which I'm very proud of. I think I'm as proud as they are for having the letters after their name. The other thing I think is a really cheap thing, but have a slide pack of least resistance. So always have a slide pack for that you can, with key slides about your job and that you can talk about, so that if someone says at sort of almost 5 minutes notice, can we have a presentation, you've got a generic one. I've got a couple, one on the role of science in warfare, which I could use at almost like any occasion, and there's a great slide in it that Rachel will love, because it's an image of a World War II aircraft with all the shot holes on it. And of course, this was an aircraft with the shot holes was one that came back. And they were going to up armor all the place where the shot holes were, until someone pointed out, well, you might be better to armor the bits where there aren't any shot holes, because we know that the ones where that are shot there don't come back. And so it's essentially that knowing that data is key. But I think it's having a slide pack of least resistance. And finally, and this was another game changer for me, try and be strategic in your interactions. By what I mean is, if you send an email and you get a snotogram back, don't think, oh no, this is my career over, I'm going to be sacked tomorrow morning. See it as a win. This person has engaged. They're interested in the topic you're trying to communicate them. Then think, what do I want this person to do? What action I'm trying to get from them? What agreement am I trying to get from them? And then tailor your reply around that strategic intent. Don't knee jerk, don't think, and certainly don't panic. So I think those are my well more than one comments to answering that, Ricky.
There's some brilliant examples here. Thank you. I really like that. I can definitely attest to the slide pack. Rachel's seen it live in action. We've been abroad working together, and you don't know what you're going to get asked, and you're in a meeting and suddenly I remember Rachel looking at my screen, for example, and going, are we presenting? Are we doing something? And it was just because someone had said, can you answer these questions? And we had a slide pack ready to go, and it works. And you get loads of positive outcomes out of it. So they're definitely worth their weight in gold, I think. I think that's a really, really good, valid point to have. And it shows you know your stuff as well, because, you know, if it's something you're regularly talking on, you'll be able to do it easy enough and get your points across, and that's what matters. So thank you both, and thank you, Bridget and Drew, as well. It's been really, really helpful and really insightful. I think we really enjoyed it, and I look forward to sharing this with the wider membership in a few weeks' time. And yeah, thanks for all taking part, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Take care. Bye.